as you may know, he is a professor in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Florida Atlantic University, co-director of the Cyberbullying Research Center, and faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard University. He's recognized internationally for his groundbreaking work on the subjects of cyberbullying, sexting, and social media, gaming abuse, and the concerns that have paralleled the exponential growth in online communication by young people. He has written 7 books. Many of you sold out your books last night. I told you to bring more. And his interdisciplinary research has been cited approximately 22,000 times across fields that include pediatrics, information technology, computer science, business, psychology, education, and nursing. As a noted researcher and speaker on youth and social media issues for the last 20 years, he trains technologists, educators, mental health professionals, youth specialists, parents, and students around the world. And he disseminates, from my perspective, better than anybody in our group. He is often cited in CNN, NPR, BBC. I've been driving around the counties of North Carolina and often hear your soft voice on NPR, and I'm like, feel so warm inside, and the New York Times. He works closely with Google, Snap, Twitch, Meta, TikTok, Intel, Johnson & Johnson, Merrill Lynch, Verizon, Cartoon Network, among many others. United Nations, White House, World Bank, National Guard, National PTA, ADL, which is the Anti-Defamation League, on how to shape policy programs that make kids more safe. I could go on and on and on, but we're going to hear from him. So grateful. Samir, take it over.
Thank you. All right, so I had to take a tack with regard to what I was going to share today. And what I was thinking is that let's try to meet the needs of practitioners in a more specific way. And so I'm happy to chat with you about the specifics of research. We can talk about methodological concerns and approaches. We can talk about multivariate analysis and binomial regression, whatever you would like to dive into. But instead, I wanted to, for this more public presentation, share with you some of the strategies that I'm seeing being used with success in schools. We've also collected new data as it relates to cyberbullying. And for those of you not familiar with me, I do study cyberbullying and a number of other online harms. As Dorothy mentioned, sexting, digital dating abuse, digital self-harm, and many of the other scholars here also study those topics. And so I love the fact that together we're co-laboring to make a difference as it relates to the intersection of youth and technology, social media, gaming, etc. I also focus a lot on not just those negatives, but perhaps more importantly, the positives. How can we promote the positive use of social media and technology? How can we enhance civility and kindness and peer respect and tolerance and embracing diversity and all these goals that you and I have, without a doubt, as we work and shepherd with the students under our care. So that's what I'm going to be getting into today, and hopefully it'll be of value to you. Let's begin. First off, here in the United States, a little bit of context. It has been pretty tricky and a little bit rough, given the fact that the government is identifying social media as a concern. And that is with some merit, without a doubt. Our Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, put out an advisory in May of this year just discussing or perhaps posing the question, is social media unsafe? Now that's a bit of a loaded question because I think that also means that we should be asking, is social media safe? And in the advisory, he did point out some negatives related to sleep and loneliness and well-being, but also in that same advisory, he focused on the positives as well. Connections, identity exploration, knowledge acquisition, all of these benefits that youth are embracing and gaining so much skills, so many abilities, and again, so much knowledge from. The media, however, focused a lot on those negatives. And so perhaps we understand why they love to run with sensationalistic stories, but I'm of the opinion we should never throw the proverbial baby out with the bathwater. We understand without a doubt that social media and these online environments, they benefit you, and they benefit you, and they benefit you, and they benefit our children, without a doubt. Of course, we need to take a sober approach and make sure that the negatives never outweigh the benefits, but I don't want us to see us demonizing these technologies or even the companies, because they are making our lives better economically, socially, intellectually, in a number of ways. I also want to say that many times we point, or some people point to social media as having such an incredible influence, perhaps the dominant influence in the lives of youth. But I'll also say, as I work with youth, and so many of you do too as well on the front lines, that social media, their technology use, their screen time is just one component of their lives. They're also dealing with many of the issues that the previous generation faced as well. Romantic relationships, parents fighting all the time, the potential of divorce, acne and self-image and body image sorts of struggles, school pressures, the desire to fit in. And so much of what they're dealing with is consistent over the course of so many generations. And yes, we have social media, but again, it's just a component, it's just an element of their lives. And it's affecting them, I would say, in equal measure as all these other elements are affecting them too. In the United States, we are now seeing a spate of laws being proposed. And those laws, for the most part, are intended to curb the use of technology and social media by youth. So we've got social media bans, we've got social media curfews, depending on the state. We have got calls for additional parental controls and youth controls, and that I'm on board with. But I just feel, and perhaps you'll agree with me, that if we try to propose these bans, number one, they're unenforceable. Number two, they disadvantage certain populations, especially those who use the internet in order to, learn more about themselves, to express themselves, to grow as an individual, both personally and professionally. And I'm also thinking that when we do that, we're not really moving ahead with the times. We have this very sort of censorship type of mentality, even though I think we need to be much more progressive, because the internet and social media and gaming platforms, they are here to stay. They are absolutely here to stay. So we can't bury our heads in the sand and continue to just prohibit and shame individuals who are using these technologies. Many other countries, remarkably, and perhaps not surprisingly, are very much more progressive with this. They're trying to figure out age verification. They understand that perhaps access to the internet should be considered a human right, and I love that. And so I would love for the United States to move more in that direction, and hopefully we will. I try to be optimistic. So then thinking about platforms, again, we don't want to vilify any of these platforms. I think that if we're objective about it, there's a lot of positives. Youth are able to level up in so many ways. And so when you think about that, the vast majority of youth on these platforms, whether they're gaming or social media, they're doing the right thing. They're being relatively responsible, relatively respectful, even kind sometimes, at least neutral, when they're going online, benefiting from the technologies or the platforms or connecting with their peers and friends, and then getting offline and doing something else, whether it's working with their schoolwork or hanging out with their friends or going to movies, which they still do, believe it or not. And so I think we must consider things in that light. Otherwise, if we just focus on the negative, I think that youth pick up on that. Maybe not our words, but our body language, our tone, our judgment, and they will shut down. They will put up walls, and they'll never open up to us, and they will never come to us when they're in trouble, even though we're in positions to help them. We kind of know what we're doing because we made it to a certain age. So thinking about cyberbullying, and we had a long discussion about definitions yesterday, but we have an academic definition, which is willful and repeated harm inflicted through the use of cell phones, computers, and other devices. But you all have a relatively shared conception of what cyberbullying is, and I would just ask you, for the purposes of your work, just focus on that individuals are being harmed in certain ways. We also see that there's a pretty significant overlap where you've got online harassment and bullying, but then you've got offline harassment and bullying. Why is that? Well, perhaps you know that when it comes to cyberbullying, the aggressors tend to be peers from school. It isn't necessarily some random stranger out there, targeting children. It's typically someone that the child, the victim, the target knows from school. With that said, that gives me hope, because that means we're not sort of combating some sort of nameless, faceless, amorphous entity out there across the World Wide Web. Instead, it's, again, someone who we know and we can support, because that person is probably struggling in some capacity. That person is not a sociopath. They're just dealing with their issues, and they're acting out in a dysfunctional, without a doubt, dysfunctional, unhealthy way to deal with their issues by targeting other people. It's not rationalizable, but we can understand it. And so thinking about some of our statistics, we collected brand new data just a few months ago, so I wanted to just sort of level set with you. Left side of the chart, you see traditional bullying. This is a national sample of about 5,000 youth, middle schoolers and high schools, nationally representative. About 1 out of 3 have been bullied at school in the last month. We also see that about 3 out of 4 say that they've been bullied at school across their lifetime. And maybe that aligns with your own experience as you work with students. On the right side of the chart, we focus on online bullying or cyberbullying. And maybe this, again, parallels your own conceptions. 1 out of 2 have been bullied in the last 30 days, and about 55% say they've been bullied in their lifetime. So thinking about that, we understand that across a lifetime, school-based bullying still occurs more frequently. But we seem to see that cyberbullying may be on the uptick. And again, that's what our research is finding. We're not seeing drastic shifts, but I think that all of us, if we're brainstorming together, we're thinking, yeah, we've got COVID and how that forced so many people to be at home with a lot more screen time than normal. We had distance learning, and so they needed to stay in touch with their friends to meet their relational and their social needs. And so consequently, of course, dramas and various other things kind of flared up online, and that's kind of continued without a doubt as we move forward from COVID and hopefully past it. So about 26.5% was our rate. Now, I also wanted to break down, very briefly here, specific forms of harassment. You know, it's been measured in a variety of ways, and as long as all of you researchers spell out how you measured it, it's great, because then we can understand your approach. You can look at this at your leisure, and I'm happy to again share with you these slides and the specific data, but I want to call out a few things. These struck me. So over the last couple of days, we've had some amazing presentations related to bias-based harassment and hate speech. And so here we have posted mean names or comments online about me with a sexual meaning. So there we're thinking about perhaps sexual harassment, perhaps targeting someone based on their identity, their sexual expression, etc. About 16%. We also see mean names or comments about race or color. In some jurisdictions, that's considered a hate crime, depending on the severity, depending on the context. And here, posting mean or name comments about my religion, about 9%. Also want to draw your attention to something else we looked at. We see here, repeatedly contacted me via text or online. So here I'm thinking about personal invasion of privacy. I'm also thinking about stalking, about 14%. These are not adults, these are youth across America. And here we have someone tracked or monitored my location or activities after I told them to stop, about 10%. So I just want you to have these on your radar. As we're talking to youth about cyberbullying, I hope that you're also talking to them about healthy online relationships and what it looks to date in this wired or connected culture, etc. And of course, also bias-based harassment, unacceptable in every situation. We can never justify that. A couple other data slides, and then we'll quickly move into prevention and response. So I think a lot about emotions, because the research is very clear in juvenile justice and criminal justice, as Oliver will share with you, that when youth struggle with heavy emotions, such as anger, frustration, sadness, fear, embarrassment, many times, because they're young, they haven't developed these positive coping skills to help them proactively deal with it. And so they end up coping in some sort of dysfunctional or unhealthy way, whether it's through externalizing harm, again, delinquency, various forms of minor and moderate school violence, and of course, internalizing harm. That could look like self-harm. That could look like suicidal ideation, suicidal attempts. So that's why we do care about emotions and how it just puts youth in a fog where they're not able to quickly extricate themselves and act very rationally. Again, compartmentalizing that emotion and still make good choices. But we want to extend grace towards them, because I was the same way. I had a pimple on my forehead and it was the worst thing ever, and I was not able to focus on anything, and I was miserable for that day or for that week. And that says nothing about relationships, which I dealt with a lot, and many of you did as well, which is perhaps in part why we're in this field. Who did you tell about your experience? So we've studied this for well over a decade. I'm pleased to report that almost 70% are talking to a parent or a guardian. We want that, without a doubt. And so kudos to all of you, those of you who are working with children or who have children, because I feel like you are somehow able to convey that I'm not going to freak out on you. Please just give me a chance to come through for you. Let's work on this together. Let's figure out a mutually agreeable solution or path moving forward. Well done, 7 out of 10 talk to a parent. Unfortunately, though, if we move to about the middle of the chart, youth are still very unconfident talking to someone at school. Even though educators, you're so willing to come through for them, you are. And you tell them, please, come up to me, let's schedule an appointment, chat with me after class. But we see only about 16% talk to a school counselor. Only about 14% are talking to a teacher. A little bit less than that are talking to a principal or another sort of individual at school. So I feel like throwing my hands up in the air when it comes to what we can do to increase those percentages, but some of the solutions I'll share with you later as it relates to school climate, a topic we talked about yesterday, I think will absolutely help. Dorothy's been very clear in mentioning multiple times throughout this conference the importance of relationships, and so that ties into it as well. How did you deal with your most recent experience with cyberbullying? Thankfully, again, about 7 out of 10 block the aggressor. We have to be very clear that student, son, daughter, you don't have to put up with this. You don't have to just take it like a punk. You can use the software, you can use the app or the game to block the interactions that you might possibly have with this individual. Please do that. I'd love for that number to be much closer to 100%. Additionally, we see that about 33%, 1 out of 3 are logging out for a while, but only about 31% are reporting it to the site or the app. That should be way higher. Every single one of these major platforms or apps has functionality within a couple of touches of the touchscreen or clicks to make a report about someone, about their comment, about their caption, about their picture, about their video. Why do they hesitate? Maybe, just maybe in the back of their minds, they're thinking, if I report against this peer based on what they posted on this specific app, I'm gonna get outed. They're gonna find out that it was me who reported on them. But all of you, please continue to convey to them that no, this is all behind the scenes, it's all anonymous. When you make a report, the platform will then look into it. If it violates their rules or terms of service, they will pull it down. They're morally responsible and ethically responsible to do that. And so I just feel like that's one of the main messages that we need to share, because youth continue to be hesitant about reporting. A small proportion reported to the school, even though, as I mentioned, the aggressor tends to be someone from school. But I get it. Maybe at school, when they've done that, the adult has flown off the handle and responded in some sort of manner that made it the talk of the school, and now they're targeted for additional retaliation. And we know our youth will do anything to avoid that from happening. Percentage of students who feel safe at school. I thought this was interesting, and I'll be brief here. So of students who were not bullied or cyberbullied, about 91% generally feel safe at school. But then we're thinking about, okay, what about those who have been victimized with school-based bullying? Well, then we're down to 83%. But then when we're thinking about cyberbullying, we're down to about 75, 76%. And isn't it fascinating that a person feels more unsafe when they're targeted online? Because I would think that you would feel more unsafe at school if you're targeted at school. But for whatever reason, pervasiveness, perniciousness of online attacks, youth can't handle it. Again, youth can't bracket it, and it overwhelms them, and they truly do feel unsafe at school. And as an educator, we can't allow that to happen. School avoidance, you see that about 20% have skipped school because of cyberbullying, and about 1 out of 2, when they were cyberbullied, it deeply affected their ability to learn and feel safe. So many of you are pounding the table for more resources to focus on the building of soft skills, social and emotional learning, and conflict resolution, self-regulation of emotions, all of these things that we believe students need to learn. And so if we can point out that it's affecting them, affecting attendance, affecting academic achievement, which we'll talk about later, affecting their ability to learn, then maybe, just maybe, we'll get more resources. I know it's hard, I really do. I know that you're doing your best to try to get personnel, more hires, more curriculum, etc. Please keep trying, and if we can help sort of support that message, we will. Couple other final charts here. I recently wanted to think more about trauma. You might remember that in 2017, the Centers for Disease Control identified bullying as an ACE, an adverse childhood experience, along with many other adverse childhood experiences, which all point to leading to trauma, leading to poor outcomes later in life. So I wanted to sort of dive into this, and I'm working on a paper related to the traumatic effects using a national sample. Very quickly, 31%, because of cyberbullying, had strong negative beliefs about themselves. Like, there's something wrong with me, and blaming themselves. We also see that 30% felt very upset when something reminded them of that. So you think about PTSD. Having difficulty concentrating, negatively impacting friendships, and then trouble falling or staying asleep. So physiologically, psychosomatically, we've got these negative byproducts as well. And then I believe my last chart here related to trauma, strong physical reactions, heart pounding, trouble breathing, sweating. 1 out of 4 kids. 1 out of 4 kids lost interest in activities that they used to enjoy. And again, maybe 1 out of 5 said it hurt their schoolwork, and about 1 out of 5 said it's leading to these negative memories. So I think all of this underscores what we already know, anecdotally, based on our experience, that there are these strong, even traumatic implications and fallout stemming from cyberbullying. Let's get into strategies. So again, I wanted to focus this talk more for practitioners. And so this is what I'm seeing work as I specifically go to schools and give trainings and also just spend full days working with those instructors and working with those students. School climate. I'm so thankful that over the last couple of days, Enrique has brought up school climate. Christina talks about school climate, I believe, in one of the Q&A question sessions that we had. So when you think about school climate, very basically, I always think about certain elements coming together in a constellation, such as connectedness. Do students feel connected? Belongingness. Do they feel like they belong? Do they feel seen? Do they feel valued? What about morale? Is morale high or medium or low? Not just amongst the students, but also amongst the teachers and the staff. Elements of school climate also include school safety, school spirit, like go Cardinals. All of that again ties into it. But what we see without a doubt when it comes to school climate is that when you elevate school climate, you have higher academic achievement, you have higher attendance, you have less truancy, and you have less behavioral problems, both offline and online. And we wrote a book about it, and so you can check that out at your leisure, or I can send you whatever you need, underscoring that you have much less cyberbullying, much less sexting, and related problematic behaviors when you're able to enhance school climate. And we compared school by school by school. So then I wanted to move on from that because, okay, that's great, but let's try to dive into this a little bit more specifically. So let's take a walk down memory lane and go back to our undergraduate or graduate training. Think about learning about parental styles. So you remember Diana Baumrind and Jacoby and Martin, how they identified that, wow, there's these parental styles that are kind of emerging to the surface on two axes. One axis would be disciplinary structure. What do I mean by that? So thinking about a home, just for 1 second, thinking about a home, you've got rules in place. You've set expectations, and you want to make sure those expectations are high, and you believe your sons and daughters will actually rise up to those expectations instead of keeping them low and saying, they're just kids, they're just teenagers, they're going to monkey around all the time. No, setting expectations high, having structure, having consequences, all that is tied into disciplinary structure. And then emotional support and warmth. We know what that means. That means an environment that you're building at home of unconditional love and support. And yes, you messed up, but I'm still in your corner, and I'm still your biggest fan, and I will always be cheering you on. So we know that when you've got low emotional support and low disciplinary structure in homes, you've got what's called neglectful parenting. Some situations, though, in a home, you're very loving, you're very forgiving, you're incredibly gracious, but to be honest, you really haven't put in the time to set rules and enforce rules and have high expectations. So those are permissive households. Then we have authoritarian households, which are, kind of on the other extremes where, yes, you do have that structure and you do have those rules and those consequences and sanctions and all of it. But unfortunately, you're quite low in creating and maintaining an environment of love and care and grace and support. And then finally, it's been so clear amongst many studies that authoritative school climates, parent homes, and I'll get to climates in a second, authoritative homes are the best, where yes, you've got structure, but you're also providing that structure and setting those rules and even exacting those sanctions or consequences in an environment of unconditional love and care. So authoritative parenting, that is where it's at. So what my colleague Justin Patchen and I, we co-direct the Cyberbullying Research Center, wanted to do was evaluate how this might relate to school climate. So thinking about different schools, thinking about disciplinary structure and emotional support that teachers, administrators, staff provide, can we sort of flesh this out? And what we saw very clearly was that in authoritative in authoritative schools, now we're talking about schools, we have much less bullying and we have much less cyberbullying. Again, in authoritative schools, where you have taken the time to build that structure. Kids need structure. When you have taken the time to set rules and expectations, kids need rules and expectations, but you do so with compassion. You do so with so much care and kindness and love and coming alongside of them. Well, then you have much less bullying and cyberbullying. Additionally, you have much less school avoidance in schools that are marked by authoritative structures. That matters. School avoidance affects our students and our schools in great significance, with great significance. And then finally, my last slide here, we see that students feel much more safe in authoritative climates. You might think that, well, if we're very sort of lovey-dovey and coming alongside of them and being very careful, then they should feel it. But no, they also need that structure to know that someone is looking out for them as they try to feel their way, navigate the uncharted terrain of growing up, figuring out who they are, and then growing in their skill sets and in their knowledge. So tied into this, we're thinking about how do we build these positive school climates. And we could all, and there's so many experts here on school climate. For example, Christian and Adam from the National School Climate Center are here as well. So the point is that we could spend an entire hour or longer talking about strategies. And so I've just picked a few of them. First off, we've often heard about make sure we got trusted adults on campuses. And I really do like the concept of trusted adults, and we hope that the students will come to them. But I'd like to rephrase that. I really like the concept instead of askable adults. Again, askable adults. Because when I was growing up, I was surveying the landscape, looking for adults that I could come to and just chat with about life, about the fact that my parents were fighting every night, and I just didn't know what this was gonna end up in. The fact that I might have had a crush on someone and I don't really know how to talk to them. The fact that I'm struggling with how I'm Indian and I have hairy arms and hairy legs and I'm physically different than all these other peers around me, and I kind of hate myself. I'm looking for an adult to just talk this out with me and show me that they care about me and show me that I do have value. And so if you can identify yourself, educators and practitioners, as those askable adults, I think that it'll go a long way in creating those elements that make up a positive school climate. Additionally, and I alluded to this, man, we judge, and maybe not with our words, maybe we bite our tongue, but kids still pick up, as I mentioned, on our body language, on our tone, and then they don't want to talk to us because they're afraid of being blamed, and they're already dealing with a lot of self-blame and a lot of guilt just living their lives. And so maybe educators, you can have a sign in your office so that they know visibly, and it might seem a little bit pedantic, but students need this. Students need to know that they're not going to be judged for obviously who they are, their identity, how they want to express themselves, but also what they're dealing with. Maybe they're also partly to blame, and so maybe they're hesitant to come to you, but they still don't deserve to be targeted or victimized in any capacity. So set up a judgment-free zone. During COVID, a lot of educators were very proactive in staying connected to all the students who are now forced to be at home. That was great. That was wonderful. For example, we had principals who would just kind of go for a walk in the morning early, and they weren't able to see their students and they weren't able to go to school, but they went for a walk and they just made an Instagram video welcoming everyone to the day, maybe giving shout outs to those students who had birthdays because they know the registrar and they know whose students have birthdays, and just keeping them connected with the school, keeping them connected with what was going on in the next week or if standardized testing was coming up, keeping them excited to be part of the community, keeping them invested. So they would use social media, and they would share that content. And then also students would set up these spirit weeks. You know about spirit weeks. You may have done that in your own school, where on this day you wear pajamas. On this day you rep your favorite sports team, etc. But using social media to do this, because kids are online anyways, I think can really, again, enhance their level of investment and their feelings of community and association with the school. So they create content regarding certain themes, and then they post it tied to a specific hashtag. And then most people in the school, because they're on social media, they follow that hashtag and they engage with and interact with that content. And everyone keeps coming back to that feed or that account because they love it. And again, it makes them feel part of something special. I want to be a part of something that's winning, something that's special. And so I'm looking for cultures that I can align myself with. Anonymous reporting systems also help towards positive school climates. So when Governor Roy Cooper was here, he mentioned that you have a statewide anonymous reporting system, and I think that has great value. I'd also ask you to consider creating something on the school level. You can use Google Voice to set up a free anonymous text line, anonymous voice memo type line. And students, again, they don't want to reveal their identity, but they do want to have a safe experience at school. And so many will speak up as long as they know there's not going to be any sort of potential retaliation, they're not going to get outed, etc. I've written a guide for how you can use Google Voice to build an anonymous reporting system, but please know students want to speak up. And let me be honest here. Across the school year, you will get a few false positives. You will get a few students who clown around and send in these ridiculous fake reports, but by and large, these anonymous reporting systems across the nation are used well. And I'd love to hear the experiences in other countries as it relates to anonymous reporting systems. Social norming. So again, thinking about the National School Climate Center, I mentioned Christian and Adam, and one of my colleagues, Randy Ross, some of you know, has done great work. As it relates to social norming, what is social norming? That is simply involving changing the prevailing mentalities as to what youth think is acceptable or you think is what's everybody doing across the school. So maybe at a school, the prevailing mentality is that bullying is just how it is. You just got to deal with it. You just got to grow a backbone and kind of try to shrug it off and pretend that it doesn't faze you. And also, maybe the mentality is we don't go to educators. We don't talk to them. If you talk to them, it's going to blow up in your face. You can't trust anyone here. However, when you actually collect data in your school, you find out that, for example, in this case at a middle school, 63% have actually spoken up. The majority, almost 2 out of 3 kids, speak up. We love that. Let's get that percentage higher because the vast majority of us are speaking up. 74%, 3 out of 4 have actually intervened, have tried to intervene, have tried to stop it. They have a conscience. They don't want to see this around their school. They want to do something about it. If we share that mentality, maybe, just maybe, others will be like, yeah, this is what we do around here. I'm going to do the same thing. Another example, 4 out of 5 students believe they can prevent bullying. So they don't think that they're just pawns in the system. They think that they have agency and autonomy, and I love to see that. And by the way, you've seen so many more youth speak up on social media about what they believe in. Causes, social justice issues, kindness, tolerance, etc. Hopefully that trend continues, but it's going to require us to continue to encourage our youth to do so. But social norming definitely helps. I believe Kevin also has discussed that. We've also seen in schools a lot of value from contests. Students love participating in contests. Maybe you can get local businesses to donate prizes. Down in West Palm Beach, near where I live, we have a water park with slides and rides and so forth. And so that water park has donated tickets to various campaigns, admissions tickets. We've had movie theaters donate tickets. Here in the United States, we have stores like Walmart and Target, and they have community service branches or reps, which will give you a check for $1,000, which you can also use to buy goods or gifts or prizes for contests. But then students, they're so adept and skilled at creating videos, whether it's short-formed or whether it's a few minutes long, memes or t-shirt logos or posters. There's so much that can be done. Spoken word poetry, like we heard a couple of nights ago. And so if you create a contest, whether it's grade versus grade or school versus school, maybe they'll create these public service announcements, which, number one, get them invested in the topic, because they spend hours creating the content. And number two, now you have it as a tool. Now you have it as something that you can use in your messaging campaigns, in your strategies, on the school Facebook page to then share with the parent audience or with other educators. You can continue to use those posters, those videos, etc., to carry the torch, to sort of pound the table for what we care about, what we're all about at our school. So switching gears a little bit, and again, please follow up with me if you need more suggestions and solutions that are research-informed, research-based, and even research-evaluated as it relates to school climate. Just let me know. But let's switch gears and talk about resilience. When I think about resilience, there's all these academic definitions like developing social and academic competence in the face of stressors, including severe stress. Now that's great, but what I think about is just being able to bounce back, just being able to overcome hardship and adversity. Now, I would imagine all of you are resilient. All of you have dealt with struggles and pain and hardship, and you've pushed through to get to where you're at. Our students have as well, but to be honest, sometimes they struggle, sometimes they fail, sometimes they fall apart as they deal with that adversity. But we want them to grow in adversity. And I just feel like sometimes when we talk about bullying and cyberbullying, it's immediately go to a trusted adult. But that strips them of the agency and the autonomy which we need them to develop to handle social conflict, which is part and parcel of life. And so as we think about resilience, let's try to figure out ways to help them develop that toolbox, those skill sets that are so essential. So I have purchased for my children a few months ago a RC or remote controlled car, but this holiday season, I'm going to get for them an RC or remote-controlled boat, which we can take to the nearby ponds and the nearby lakes and the nearby swimming pools, and I think we could have a lot of fun with them. Now, what I'm seeing as I evaluate, I'm a researcher, maybe when you make a purchase, you do the same thing. You spend way too much time on Amazon or another site, kind of like looking at all the comments and the descriptions. Well, I've identified that the best RC or remote control boats are those that have a self-righting feature. So let's say it flips over in the water. Well, you don't want to have to wade into the water to like grab it and turn it back over. You want it to have some sort of function or facility to right itself. Bringing this back to resilience, it is so cool to know that every individual, youth and adults, they are hardwired for self-righting. They are hardwired for self-righting, which means that it's innate. It's an innate characteristic. And so I think that's great. We just have to support it and bolster it through my efforts, through your efforts, etc. We wrote a research paper on this. Very briefly, it was very clear that resilience matters. When kids were targeted, when it comes to bullying and cyberbullying, those with the highest levels of resilience, it didn't make them fall apart. They were able to still succeed in school. They were able to still feel safe and not be so bothered by it. But those kids with the lowest levels of resilience, unfortunately, they deeply struggled. Another takeaway from this research was that those kids with the highest levels of resilience, when they were targeted, let's say cyberbullying, they engaged in pro-social responses, such as reporting it to the app or the site, talking to a parent, blocking, muting the other person, et cetera, changing their screen name. We love to see it. But those kids with the lowest levels of resilience, unfortunately, when they were cyberbullied, they just suffered silently. They just took it. We would never want that for them. We would want them to feel, again, the agency and autonomy to do something about it. So we could spend a whole hour on resilience strategies. Feel free to follow up with me. I've just chosen a few. Number one, when I'm working with a student, what I like to do personally is let's immediately go to the worst case scenario. Because in their mind, they can't really articulate the worst case scenario, but they just imagine that their life is going to completely fall apart. They're going to be the pariah at the school. Life is never going to get better. They're going to be forever alone. But again, they can't really articulate, okay, let's think this through. Let's try to sort of speak and say what would be the worst situation here if everyone sees this comment or if everyone sees this photo. I mean, to be honest, we can't really control what people see or what people think. You know, what do we have control about? Maybe we should focus on that. And maybe if we really think about it, the worst case scenario isn't that bad for a number of reasons. And so again, the hope is that we're able to help them get a grip on the situation, temper their, perhaps perceptions about the worst case scenario, and then help them to understand that life moves pretty quickly and who knows what's going to be next. That leads me to my next point here, which is that in school, the news cycle changes very quickly. Yes, I understand you could have the worst day ever and everyone's talking about you based on this specific post on social media or this hateful content or this humiliating video. I get that. I would hate for that to happen to me, and I would hate for that to happen to you or you, the students that I work with. But if we take a step back, the reality is that there's going to be something else that's talked about the next day or the next week. And sometimes in life, if we're real, you just got to survive that day or that week. And again, focus on what you can control. So thinking about that, I just feel like youth really struggle with this because they maybe imagine or assume that they should have control over a lot of things, but as you and I have grown up, we realize that in truth, we have very little control over so much. And what we've also realized is that the best way to approach life is to, instead of clinging very tightly and white-knuckling so much, we should hold things loosely. Otherwise, unfortunately, we struggle desperately. To be honest, I still struggle a little bit with control. Maybe some of you have control issues as well, but we know in our mind cognitively the right things to do. And so when I'm working with students, maybe I'll even use this Venn diagram and say, look, this is what we can control. Let's focus on your academic achievement. Let's try to understand, and they're not going to get this in their heart, but hopefully in their mind, that these 4 years of high school or these 3 or 4 years of middle school, whatever it is, I know it feels like your entire life and there's nothing else, but when you look back upon it, this is just going to be a tiny blip. And that's just one talking point. There's so many others that we need to emphasize when we're working one-on-one, building that relationship with students. Related to that is now is not forever. So, I mean, to be honest with you, my middle school and my high school life, it was rough. I struggled so much. I was super introverted. I was self-conscious, and I just had to somehow keep telling myself, and I don't know where this mature perspective came from, but I just had to keep telling myself that life will open up to me, when I get to college and when I become an adult. And eventually, even though I am a late bloomer, I'm going to bloom. I'm gonna find myself. I'm gonna find my lane. And so having those conversations and even sharing a little bit of vulnerability with the students in front of you, I think goes such a long way. And, some of us are familiar with the work of Brene Brown and how vulnerability actually connects us. I also think about bucket filling. What's interesting is that when you talk to students, they know that in some of their friendships, it's very one-directional instead of bi-directional. A healthy relationship, a healthy friendship, it's like both of you are pouring in equal amounts into that relationship. But for whatever reason, many students, even though they recognize they're in a one-sided relationship, they don't pull out from it. They keep giving and giving and giving, and they keep getting drained. And I want them to instead be thinking about, who fills their bucket? What we also realize is that when we glom on to this person because they're popular, or when we try to fit in with this group because maybe we think that it'll protect us from being targeted, harassed, offline or online, well, that actually doesn't set us up for success in the future. Because, and this will align with your intuition, research shows that the kids who are able to move from person to person and group from group easily, kind of floating, they do so much better as adults. But those who are, again, just holding on to this best friend or this clique or this group, they struggle because their identity is, again, rooted too deeply in that. So when I'm talking to them, it's you realize that one specific individual can't meet all of your needs. That friend over there is really good at keeping a secret. That friend over there is really good at making you laugh. That friend over there is really good at helping you study when you really need to lock in and prepare for that next test. So allow a variety of people from a variety of backgrounds to meet your needs. And I think that is just healthy. And then I was chatting with Susan Limber yesterday about identity. And so I worry so much about this. And of course, it ties into social media and where our youth are getting their identity from. You think about constant comparison, which some of the researchers at WABF have talked about as well. I just feel like we cannot be getting our identity from peer perception because peer perception is so mercurial. It's like this roller coaster. And if you're dependent on that to feel good about yourself, it's going to be a bad outcome for you. And so with that said, what are some solid, some sort of deeply rooted anchors that we can focus on? And we have to bring those up in our conversations with youth. It could be faith. It could be a certain value system. It could be the fact that you are really working hard academically to, again, set yourself up for success. What are some, again, more unchangeable and less malleable, things that you can focus in on, that you can root your identity in? Because when that happens, kids are not so affected by what people are saying, because there's always going to be those individuals who are chirping in the background, critiquing on the sidelines, as Theodore Roosevelt told us. Another activity that I really like that was introduced to me by one of my colleagues, Phyllis Fagel, who's a colleague of one of our attendees, which is Tim Cavell. Tim Cavell is a professor at the University of Arkansas and a clinical psychologist, written a number of papers as well. But my point there is that I love connections, because connections lead us to resources, and resources lead us to activities, which then I'm able to use and you're able to use in schools and with our students. Bottom line here, online you can just Google lists of values, and you'll find lists of 50 values and 100 values, and then you might give that worksheet to a student and say, please circle 15 or 20 values that you want to represent, that you want, where it's this is who Samir is, this is who Samir wants to be. Now, what I've done is had much better luck with, let's say, 15 to 18 values, and then I have students circle only 5. And then it's okay, these are my non-negotiables as I'm growing up. This is what I want to be known for, and yes, these are ideals, but I want to keep coming back to these when I struggle, or when I'm so wrapped up in what other people are thinking, or when I'm so consumed with getting people to like me and being affirmed and validated by everyone else. So if you keep coming back to these values that they identify with you through this activity, it serves as that anchor. So consider that as just this hands-on assignment, because I think it goes a long way to helping youth find themselves. Sometimes they need our help in finding themselves. And then I'm also a fan of debates. So when I was growing up, I had a certain perspective about so much. It was just oriented in one direction. And also as an adolescent, maybe because I was struggling, I was quite pessimistic and nihilistic, just very negative. And so many times when bad things happen, you just use that to reinforce your existing worldview, which is, by the way, unhealthy, at least when you're a teenager many times. So when you do debates, what it does is it promotes more naturally cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is just being okay with the fact that there could be a tension with competing viewpoints, and then maybe you work to try to resolve that tension. And so when I've done debates in a classroom setting, it's been really useful to open the eyes of students to another perspective. And so, for example, we might go through some of these questions. And you know, like I'm a tech person, and so these are tech related, but there's so many others you could debate and discuss, not just one side, but the other side. And maybe there's not just two sides, but there's multiple sides. But all of this over time then translates and changes the student. Because, for example, let's say that they're being targeted online. Maybe their initial and default slant or reaction or leaning is, I'm a victim. But I would rather them know that there's another alternative perspective, such as, I can be a victor. Or this person who's targeting me, well, maybe what they're saying about me, it's not true. And maybe they're struggling with their own junk and issues and problems, and they unfortunately don't know how to cope with them, and so they're lashing out at me. So that's an alternative perspective, which maybe as a 13-year-old wouldn't even occur to me. And so the goal, again, with these cognitive dissonance types exercises and with debates is opening their minds to multiple perspectives. Switching gears again, let's talk about empathy. If you need more strategies and activities related to resilience, don't hesitate to follow up with me. When you think about empathy, and by the way, I love that Enrique covered empathy in great detail yesterday. So many other of our sessions have talked about empathy as well. You think about cognitive empathy and affective empathy. Cognitive empathy is being able to understand what somebody else is going through, even if you might not feel the same way. And affective empathy, of course, is feeling and sharing that same emotion or affect. Empathy, without a doubt, as Enrique mentioned multiple times, is something that we have to prioritize. And the research is very clear about this. We wrote one research paper on it, and there was a special issue in the Journal of Early Adolescence, which was helmed by a couple of other of my colleagues who are here today. So just to give them a shout out, Sebastian Box and also Michelle Wright. So awesome issue with a number of pieces focused on bias-based aggression. So empathy matters. I don't need to belabor that point. Activities, because again, thinking about serving practitioners today. One activity that I've done with students is called the needs of others. So you might use Google, another search engine, to find a picture of a sad teenager, or elementary schooler, or middle schooler, or whatever. A sad, in this case, let's say teenager. So you just provide that picture to your students in the classroom. And you say, students, I'd love for you to just write a story. Tell me about the life of this person you see in this picture. And what's so interesting is that they'll start to write. And we want them to, of course, name the person. Do they have any siblings? Do they have any pets? What's their home environment like? What are their interests? What are their hobbies? Their likes and dislikes? But then also, what are their needs? What are their physical needs? Food, shelter, clothing. Who's responsible to provide those needs? Well, presumably the guardians or the parents or the step-parents, etc. Additionally, what are their psychological needs? What are their emotional needs? Who's responsible to provide those? Also, what is the student themselves in the picture responsible for providing? How can they meet their own needs? And then finally, what is something that their friends can do to meet their needs? The peer group can do. So that gets them thinking about, okay, putting myself in the shoes of someone, understanding that they have needs, understanding that there's a variety of needs, and understanding that I actually have a role to play in meeting some of those needs. What's interesting is that when you read the stories that are then submitted, many times the experiences of the student who's writing the assignment will be infused into the story that they tell about the person in the picture. So you learn a lot about that student too. And then through a time of storytelling and sharing, empathy is bred. Empathy is created and shared amongst that class because those stories are told and everyone's like, I can relate to that, and I can relate to that, and I can relate to that. Another assignment I like to do is like a top 10 list. Please write down the top best things that have ever happened to you and the top worst things that have ever happened to you, and also the top 10 best decisions you've made and the top 10 worst decisions you've made. So then we have a little bit of sharing, whether it's in small group, and we don't force anyone to share, but anyone who wants to, they can. And what we realized through this activity as well is that people might be pretending and posing and posturing that they have it all together, but we're actually very similar. trying to figure out adolescence, trying to figure out who we are, making boneheaded decisions sometimes, also proud of some of the small successes we've had in our life, and all just trying to, again, figure this out. So again, it's a very powerful activity to build empathy, to cultivate empathy amongst the student group. We also want students to continue to talk to individuals that they might not normally sit down with at lunch, might not normally have as a best friend. How can that happen? Maybe sometimes you need to specifically assign interview assignments. Maybe you give them a list of questions. If you need those lists of questions for a classroom interview type session, I'm happy to send them to you. But in these situations, you start off with building a little bit of rapport through like innocent, like vanilla type questions. But then you get into more probing questions, more sensitive questions that try to extract a little bit of vulnerability. But then the students in the assignment start to realize that everyone is fighting a hard battle. Everyone is dealing with stuff, some of it very heavy. And that just provides the opportunity for meaningful relationships to be built. Not just like, I'm gonna give you a head nod in the hallway when I see you, but no, like my heart goes out to you. I care about you. And so consequently, I'm definitely not gonna be mean to you. And number two, I'm gonna see what I can do to actually be your friend. When I first started dating my partner, we decided to take ballroom dancing lessons. And I'm not sure if any of you have taken ballroom dancing lessons. And what can I say about it? It went okay. It wasn't amazing and it wasn't awful, but to be honest, we bumped into each other and we were a little bit clumsy, and I stepped on her toes and she stepped on my toes, and it was a little bit uncomfortable because, I don't know, we're just trying to figure it out, and the teacher's right there and we want to do everything right with holding our frame and posture and all of it. And the thing is that we had to be very kind and very considerate and very gracious towards each other as we were learning the tango or the mambo or something like that. And so what I'm seeing is that when we create these opportunities for students, for example, if we set up ballroom dancing lessons in schools, well, then they also have to negotiate the best ways to communicate with another student who is, in this case, their partner, as they're trying to work together to learn something. And yes, it's awkward. Yes, it's uncomfortable, but much of life is awkward and uncomfortable as you're learning how to deal with experiences. And so if we can intentionally put them in these types of experiences, they level up. And they also learn and they grow in empathy, because you've got to be empathetic to your partner, and you desperately need the empathy of your partner because you will be messing up as you're learning these dances. Some of you are familiar with Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and we all watch TED Talks. This is one of my favorites from all time. And she speaks about the danger of a single story. What's a single story? Well, she's saying that sometimes we stereotype. We have an impression or a perspective about a certain population or a certain group, and that stereotype kind of dominates. It kind of dictates all of our thoughts towards them, our interactions with them, our conceptions of who they are and who they want to be, all of it. Unfortunately, though, that really flattens their experience very unfairly, and it kind of robs them of who they are, their experiences, the richness of it, the nuances of it, etc. I think talking about this here in this environment is very important because we've had a number of scholars focus on hate crime and bias-based offenses, etc. So in this story, she was mentioning that when she came to America from Nigeria and she was in a college dorm, she was kind of shocked that her roommate had adopted a single story about her, understanding that, okay, I'm gonna have a roommate from Nigeria. And so that roommate from the US was so surprised that Chimamanda could use a stove, that Chimamanda listened to pop music, such as Mariah Carey, that's available here in the United States. That Chimamanda had all of these, unique characteristics, which she didn't even consider because she assumed that, okay, you're Nigerian, you grow up in this small sort of town, and you probably don't have electricity, and maybe you have to go certain places for water, just really flattening her experience. So she just shared about how we've got to be super careful not to do that. But also in this TED Talk, she was very vulnerable and said that she herself had been guilty of doing the exact same thing. Because when she came to America, there was a lot of talk about immigration and Mexicans and the Latin American population, et cetera. And so when she went to Mexico for the first time, she had certain stereotypical conceptions that were very unfair. And her mind was finally opened through that visit about how wonderful and hardworking and family-oriented and community-oriented the Mexican people were. All of us can be guilty of flattening other people's experiences, adopting a single story. So bringing this back to our students, what I've had success with would be assigning specifically the task of say, okay, student, I want you to write about a time where you've adopted a single story about someone else, an individual or a group, and then additionally, has anyone else ever adopted a single story about you? How did that make you feel? How did that affect you? And through this reflective exercise, it's so amazing how their mind does again broaden and open up to the fact that I don't want to be like this anymore because I know what it feels like. And of course, we also watch the video as well to set the tone, to serve as a backdrop. Consider that as well as an activity. Again, thinking about cultures, thinking about various identity groups. Maybe when you were growing up, you had various sorts of cultural fairs where we focused on and we celebrated individual fashion from different countries. Maybe you also had dance or songs or music from different cultures, and that got celebrated and recognized. I think that's something you can do, but it cannot be a one-off affair. It has to be integrated in the curriculum, it has to be consistent, and there's many other things that can be done. Some schools have also set up what's called an International Taste Fest, so that relates to cuisine. But it isn't just about coming and sampling the food. We want to also maybe give you a passport. You got to go to each of these tables and learn a little bit about each culture, learn a little bit about the food instead of just enjoying it in your belly, and get your passport stamped. And through those types of experience, through these experiential learning activities, that's when students start to, again, appreciate more. Related to appreciation, I'm Indian, and so you might know in the Indian culture, we celebrate what's called Holi. It's a springtime festival, and it involves, colors. We think about springtime, we think about newness, we think about the victory of love over evil, et cetera, et cetera. And in the United States, we have a number of people who do appreciate Holi, which I think is wonderful. And because it's very festive and fun and colorful, it has been very attractive for many Americans and perhaps many other people in the world who perhaps aren't Hindu or don't really understand what's going on as it relates to the spiritual significance of it all. So all I'm trying to say here is that we have to be very careful that we do appreciate and understand the culture and that we don't appropriate it just to get a selfie for the latest social media post that we want to make because we participated in a color run or something like that. And I'm not vilifying a color run. I think it's wonderful. But I just want to make sure that we use these opportunities to understand the culture, understand the history, understand the significance, not just about what goes on in India, which would be my culture, but so many of these other beautiful, beautiful cultures that we have across the world. Also related to that, at the International Bullying Prevention Association conferences in years past, we've had colleagues come from the American Sikh Council in order to just share about the culture, and I think about what's named or what's termed Bastar Dandi. And so when you think Dastar Bandi, what it is basically a rite of passage. So you think about youth who are growing up, maybe between the ages of 11 and 18 or so. And Kavneet Singh, he's here as well, maybe in the audience. He's someone who's come to our conferences as well. And so we set up a station and we tie turbans on anyone who wants to. But the point is that we also want to teach and educate and help them to understand. Kavneet has also written a book about the experiences of a Sikh student in the United States. It's remarkable that so many individuals, not just youth, but so many adults are oblivious, even though that's the 5th largest religion in our world. We've got over 25 million adherents to that faith. And it's like, come on, please know a little bit. Please know a little bit. I think that'll go a long way, again, in terms of our goals to just appreciate different cultures and to clamp down on potential for hate and harassment, which often stems out of ignorance. Again, it stems out of ignorance. So my last point is, as I get close to wrapping up here, has to do with something new that we're experimenting with, Justin and I, and that's what's called vicarious supervision. Again, vicarious supervision. So the hope is that our children, our students, whether or not we're physically in the room monitoring them, they feel sort of monitored, they feel sort of watched over, looked over, even again if they're in the privacy of their bedroom, even if they're sort of working with their phone, the teacher's way over there, and they actually have the choice to make good decisions or bad decisions. Again, vicarious supervision. So during the youth panel, we talked about helicopter parenting, and I think it's fair. We don't want parents, guardians to be helicopters, but I also want to make sure that we don't swing too far in a certain extreme, where we're not really involved, because the research shows that you have to be involved in some capacity. Here's what we found. So this was a nationally representative sample of 2,500 youth, again, 12 to 17-year-olds, and we asked them, do you know what your parents are doing online? So we've got a couple of buckets here, most of the time always, and never or half the time. And what you can see here, as it relates to specific participation in sexting or in cyberbullying, the numbers were much lower when the students said, you know what, my parents kind of know what we're doing online. I think there's something to take away from that. Educators, parents, guardians, we've got to be involved. Another perspective here, is there an adult in your life that you definitely would not want to disappoint? So again, vicarious supervision. You're not in the room, you're not around me, but I don't want to disappoint you with the decision I'm about to make on social media or on my gaming console as I interact with other people or in this virtual world that we're going to be sort of embracing and interacting in. What you see here is that with definitely yes and definitely no, with definitely yes, again, lower proportion of cyberbullying and sexting. By the way, these are statistically significant relationships. So it matters. I think that we understand that. Let's try to be involved. But of course, we don't want to do so in some sort of heavy-handed way. You've heard it takes a village, and it does. And I feel like each of you have platforms. And yes, in your professional capacity, you might be an educator, you might be a practitioner, you might be on the front lines in your NGO, your non-governmental organization, but you might also be a mentor, you might be a coach, you might be a scout leader. I mean, you serve so many roles. And so I would encourage you to continue to broach the conversation. Don't feel like you need to be super skilled in the exact technological jargon that you should use. No, just broach the topic. Talk to them about what they're loving. Come across as positive. Come across as non-judgmental. Understand that, again, the information age is here to stay, and they're going to continue to embrace and exploit in positive ways so many of these technologies. Convey you realize that, convey that you want them to succeed personally and professionally, and convey that you're here for them. Please continue to bring it up. We need more and more conversations. Again, it is all about relationships. So with that, I'll present my contact information. And again, I appreciate this opportunity to pinch hit and just share with you some of my latest research, and again, try to equip those individuals who are practitioners on the front lines. Thank you so much for your time.